I'm sitting in HR's glass-walled conference room, staring at an organizational chart spread across the table. My name is Nina Hartley. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a senior operations manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. I've been with Midwest Distribution Systems for 9 years, long enough to know how promotions really work, long enough to recognize when something is being taken from you quietly, deliberately. The HR director, Warren Fields, slides the chart toward me with an apologetic expression I don't yet understand. My eyes scan the boxes until I find the position I've been promised for 3 years, Director of Operations. There's a name in that box. It isn't mine. It's someone who started 2 years after me. Warren clears his throat. Nina, there are some long-term concerns about your readiness for leadership. Through the glass wall, I see my current director, Bethany Cruz, laughing with a colleague near the coffee machine. That's when I realized this didn't just happen. This was planned. And I never saw it coming. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. My mind immediately flashed back to 18 months earlier, sitting in Bethany's office after I'd successfully managed our largest warehouse consolidation in company history. She'd leaned back in her leather chair, fingers steepled, smiling warmly. Nina, you're next in line, she'd said with absolute certainty. I've already started talking to corporate about your promotion. Just be patient. These things take time. I'd believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because after 7 years of arriving early, staying late, fixing problems nobody else could solve, it felt like my turn was finally coming. She'd praised my loyalty, called me her most dependable manager, told me I was being groomed for bigger things. I left that meeting walking on air, already imagining the new title on my email signature. But none of those promises, not a single one, had ever been written down. No email confirmation, no documented timeline, no official anything. Just warm words delivered privately, behind closed doors, where nobody else could hear them. The first delay came 6 months after that conversation. Bethany called me into her office wearing the same warm smile, but this time with apologies woven in. Budget freeze, she explained, shaking her head sympathetically. Corporate's tightening belts across all departments. Your promotion is definitely happening, Nina. Just not this quarter. I swallowed my disappointment and nodded professionally. I understand. These things happen. They do, she agreed, reaching across the desk to pat my hand. But you're still my top candidate. Keep doing what you're doing. So I did. I stayed late fixing inventory discrepancies. I trained new hires who technically outranked me. I covered weekend emergencies while Bethany enjoyed her lake house. I told myself this was how careers worked. You proved yourself again and again until the door finally opened. 3 months later, the budget excuse came up again. Then again. By the third delay, I started feeling a knot of unease in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Patience, I reminded myself. She said to be patient. What made it worse was that I was already doing the job I wanted. When the previous director of operations retired, Bethany quietly redistributed his responsibilities. Most of them landed on my desk. I coordinated cross-department logistics, managed vendor relationships, handled crisis communications during supply chain disruptions. I did everything except hold the title and collect the salary. In meetings, I'd present strategies I'd spent weeks developing, only to watch Bethany reframe them as collaborative team efforts. My data-driven reports would be forwarded up the chain with her name in the from field and mine buried in the CC line. Junior managers I'd personally trained started getting promoted around me, their success built on foundations I'd laid. They'd stop by my desk afterward, awkward and grateful. Thanks for everything you taught me, Nina. I couldn't have done this without your mentorship. I'd smile and congratulate them while my stomach twisted. They got credit, advancement, recognition. I got silence and vague promises about next quarter. My annual performance review that year should have been a triumph. Bethany praised my problem-solving skills, my dedication, my ability to handle complex projects under pressure. She used words like invaluable and exceptional. I sat across from her, waiting for the conclusion I'd earned, a promotion, or at least a concrete timeline. Instead, she paused, her expression shifting subtly. "There's just one area we need to address," she said carefully. "Some concerns have been raised about your leadership presence." I blinked, confused. Leadership presence? "It's nothing major," she assured me quickly. "Just feedback about communication style, confidence in high-pressure situations. Nothing that can't be improved with time and focus." I asked for specific examples. Meetings where I'd fallen short, decisions I'd handled poorly, feedback from team members. She waved her hand vaguely. "It's more about perception than concrete incidents. Just something to be aware of going forward." I left that review feeling unmoored, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own performance. Years later, HR would treat that vague criticism like documented evidence of my inadequacy. I started documenting everything after that review. Not because I was planning anything. I wasn't scheming or building a case. I just felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Bethany would praise me in meetings, then hint at nebulous concerns in private. Colleagues would compliment my leadership, then I'd hear secondhand that questions were being raised about my readiness. Nothing made sense anymore. So I started keeping records. I created a private folder on my personal laptop and began logging conversations, copying emails, screenshotting performance metrics. Every time Bethany promised, "next quarter," I noted the date. Every time she praised me publicly but criticized me privately, I wrote down exactly what was said. Patterns started emerging. The same vague phrases appeared repeatedly in her feedback: leadership presence, executive maturity, strategic thinking. Never anything specific enough to address or improve. Just abstract concerns that hovered like smoke, impossible to grasp or dispel. I didn't know what I was going to do with this documentation. I just knew I needed proof that I wasn't imagining the contradictions. The promotion I'd been promised for 3 years finally happened, just not for me. I sat in the all-staff meeting, hands folded in my lap, watching Bethany announce that Trevor Gaines was being promoted to Director of Operations. Trevor had started at the company 2 years after me. He was competent, likable, but his experience paled compared to mine. I'd literally trained him on half the systems he now managed. The room erupted in polite applause. I clapped too, my hands moving mechanically while my stomach dropped through the floor. Afterward, Trevor approached my desk, genuinely uncomfortable. "Nina, I hope this isn't weird. I know you've been here longer." I forced a professional smile. "Congratulations, Trevor. You'll do great." Bethany appeared behind him, beaming. "Nina, I'm going to need you to help Trevor transition into the role. Walk him through your current projects, share your institutional knowledge. You're the only one who really knows how everything works." She said it like an honor. Like I should be grateful for the opportunity to train my own replacement while he collected the title and salary I'd earned. That's how I ended up back in the HR conference room, staring at an org chart that erased 3 years of promises. Warren shifted uncomfortably in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "The decision was based on comprehensive performance evaluations and feedback from your direct supervisor." "Bethany," I said flatly. He nodded. "She's raised some concerns over the past few years about your readiness for executive-level responsibilities." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What concerns specifically?" Warren glanced at his notes. "Communication gaps, resistance to feedback, difficulty adapting to strategic thinking rather than tactical execution." None of those words sounded like me. I'd built my entire career on clear communication and strategic planning. I'd never received coaching, warnings, or performance improvement plans. Yet here was HR, describing a version of me I'd never met, someone who apparently wasn't qualified for a role I'd essentially been doing for 2 years without recognition. "Can I see my file?" I asked quietly. Warren hesitated. That pause told me everything I needed to know. It took 3 days for HR to produce my personnel file. When Warren finally called me back to his office, he slid a manila folder across the desk with visible reluctance. I opened it and started reading. Performance review from 3 years ago. Nina shows strong tactical skills but needs development in strategic leadership and executive presence. 2 years ago, continued concerns about Nina's ability to influence stakeholders and project confidence in high-pressure scenarios. 18 months ago, while Nina excels at operational tasks, Questions remain about her readiness for director-level decision-making. The language was remarkably consistent. Vague, repetitive, impossible to dispute because it referenced nothing concrete. No specific incidents. No witness statements. No examples I could address or refute. Just abstract doubts planted carefully, year after year, always attributed to the same source. Every single negative entry traced back to Bethany Cruz. No other supervisor, no peer feedback, no client complaints. Just her voice echoing through my file like a ghost, quietly rewriting my professional identity while I worked late and believed in promises that were never meant to be kept. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes after that meeting, rereading my file with shaking hands. The disconnect was staggering. While Bethany praised me publicly and told me I was next in line, she was simultaneously documenting concerns that contradicted everything she said to my face. The realization felt like being punched in the stomach. This wasn't neglect or bureaucratic confusion. This was deliberate, systematic. A years-long campaign to keep me exactly where I was, valuable enough to exploit, but blocked from advancing. That evening, I drafted the most careful email of my professional life. I didn't accuse Bethany of anything. I didn't express anger or hurt. I simply asked HR for clarification. I've reviewed my personnel file and noticed several performance concerns attributed to me over the past 3 years. I'm requesting specific examples, dates, and documentation of these incidents so I can better understand and address the feedback. I copied every relevant policy number, referenced the employee handbook section on performance documentation, and kept my tone relentlessly professional. Warren responded within an hour, "We'll need some time to review your request thoroughly." Something shifted after I sent that email. Bethany's behavior toward me changed overnight. Suddenly, she was effusive with praise again. In team meetings, she highlighted my contributions, thanked me publicly for my dedication, even mentioned exciting growth opportunities ahead. It was exactly how she'd acted 3 years ago when she first promised me the promotion. But now I recognized the pattern. She knew something was wrong. She knew HR was asking questions, reviewing files, connecting dots, and she was trying to rewrite the narrative in real time, acting like the supportive mentor she'd pretended to be while quietly sabotaging me behind closed doors. I smiled politely during her compliments and said nothing. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask why the sudden change. I just kept documenting everything. The dates of her praise, the witnesses present, the stark contrast between her current behavior and the concerns littering my file. Let her perform, I thought. Let her show everyone exactly how inconsistent her story really is. 2 weeks after my email to HR, something unexpected happened. 3 colleagues reached out to me separately, each conversation awkward and hesitant. The first was Keisha from Logistics. "Nina, can I talk to you about something weird?" We met for coffee, and she explained that about 2 years ago, Bethany had pulled her aside and asked pointed questions about me. She wanted to know if you were difficult to work with, if you ever pushed back on feedback, if people found you hard to approach. It felt strange because none of that matched my experience with you at all. The second was Marcus from Procurement. HR interviewed me yesterday about Bethany. They asked if she'd ever solicited negative feedback about you. She had, 3 years ago. Asked me if I thought you were executive material. I told her you were one of the best managers I'd worked with. The third was Trevor, the man who'd gotten my promotion. He looked genuinely troubled. Bethany told me you declined the director role because you preferred operational work. I had no idea she'd promised it to you first. HR was conducting a quiet investigation. I hadn't realized it at first, but my carefully worded email had triggered something. A closer look at the inconsistencies in my file, the pattern of undocumented concerns, the gap between Bethany's public praise and private criticism. Warren called me in for another meeting. This time he wasn't alone. Corporate's head of employee relations, Simone Packard, sat beside him, her expression serious. "Nina, we've been reviewing your employment history and the documentation in your file. We have some questions about the feedback process and whether proper procedures were followed." Over the next hour, they walked me through specific entries in my file, asking if I'd been informed of the concerns at the time, if I'd been offered coaching or development plans, if anyone had discussed these issues with me directly. The answer to every question was no. No warnings, No coaching, no documentation, no witnesses. Just Bethany's voice year after year, planting doubts that were never substantiated or addressed. "We're going to need to speak with Ms. Cruz," Simone said carefully. "This may take some time." Bethany's behavior became increasingly erratic as the investigation continued. In meetings, she interrupted people constantly, correcting minor details, asserting control in ways that felt desperate rather than authoritative. The confidence she'd always worn so effortlessly now looked strained, performative. She started micromanaging projects she'd previously ignored, second-guessing decisions, overriding team consensus. People noticed. During a logistics review, she contradicted her own directive from the previous week. When I gently pointed out the inconsistency, she snapped, "I think I know what I said, Nina." The room went silent. This wasn't the smooth, charming director everyone knew. This was someone losing control. After the meeting, Marcus whispered, "What's going on with her?" I shrugged. "No idea. But I did have an idea." She knew the walls were closing in. She knew HR was asking questions she couldn't answer with vague concerns and abstract doubts. And she was unraveling in real time, right in front of everyone. 3 weeks into the investigation, Warren called me into his office with an expression I couldn't read. "Nina, I want to be transparent with you. This review is more complicated than we initially anticipated. There are policy questions, legal considerations, and procedural issues that need careful examination." My heart sank. This was corporate speak for "nothing's going to change." I started mentally updating my resume, researching other companies, preparing to walk away from 9 years of loyalty and hard work with nothing to show for it but a file full of manufactured doubts. "We may not be able to resolve this in the timeline you're hoping for," Warren continued carefully. "I understand if you need to explore other opportunities." I nodded slowly, feeling defeat wash over me. I'd fought as hard as I could with documentation and careful emails and professional restraint. But maybe some battles couldn't be won. I thanked Warren for his time and walked back to my desk in a fog. Then 2 days later, everything changed again. Simone from corporate called Warren, and Warren called me. "We found something," he said, voice tight with barely contained anger. "An inconsistency in your file that doesn't make sense." He pulled up a document on his computer, one of the negative performance notes from 2 years ago. This entry is dated March 15th, but it references a client meeting that didn't happen until March 23rd. The timeline doesn't work. I stared at the screen, my brain slowly processing what this meant. Bethany had documented a concern about my performance before the event she was supposedly concerned about had even occurred. She'd pre-written her criticism, then backdated it to make it look contemporaneous. One mistake. One sloppy detail. And the entire carefully constructed narrative cracked wide open. "We're reopening the full review," Warren said. "Everything gets re-examined now." For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. HR pulled Bethany into a private meeting the following week. I sat at my desk, pretending to work on vendor contracts while my heart hammered. She walked past my cubicle on her way to the conference room, her face carefully neutral, but I caught the tension in her shoulders. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When she emerged, she looked shaken, her usually perfect composure visibly cracked. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, just walked straight to her office and closed the door. I didn't know what happened in that room, but whatever questions HR asked, Bethany's answers clearly weren't satisfying them. The investigation, which had been moving slowly, suddenly accelerated. More employees were interviewed. More documents were requested. I watched from the sidelines as the machinery of corporate accountability finally, slowly, started grinding into motion. Not because the system cared about fairness, but because they'd found documented proof of procedural violations they couldn't ignore. The breakthrough came when HR compared Bethany's explanations during her interview with the actual email record and witness statements. Her story kept changing. She claimed I'd been resistant to feedback, but emails showed I'd consistently thanked her for guidance and implemented suggestions. She said I'd struggled in client meetings, but client satisfaction scores for accounts I managed were consistently high. She insisted she'd offered me development opportunities I'd declined, but no documentation of those offers existed. Every claim, when checked against evidence, fell apart. Marcus told me later that HR had asked him point blank, "Did you ever witness Nina displaying the leadership concerns Director Cruz documented?" His answer, never. Not once. Keisha had been asked the same question. Same answer. Trevor too. A pattern emerged, undeniable and damning. Praise in public where witnesses could hear. Criticism in private where only Bethany's version existed. Until now. Until HR finally looked closely enough to see what had been happening in plain sight for years. For weeks after the investigation started, Warren and Simone called me into the conference room again. This time, their expressions were completely different. Warren looked uncomfortable. Simone looked angry, not at me, but on my behalf. "Nina, we need to apologize," Simone began carefully. "Our review has revealed that your personnel file contains inaccurate and procedurally inappropriate documentation. Concerns were recorded without following proper performance management protocols, without giving you opportunity to respond, and in some cases, without factual basis." Warren cleared his throat. "We've documented a pattern of inconsistent and unreliable performance feedback from your direct supervisor. The concerns raised in your file don't align with objective metrics, peer feedback, or client outcomes." I sat very still, afraid to speak, afraid to hope. "We're removing the contested entries from your personnel file," Simone continued. "They'll be sealed and archived separately as part of the investigation record, but they'll no longer be considered in evaluating your performance or qualifications." She paused, meeting my eyes directly. "Given the circumstances, we'd like to know what outcome you're seeking." I'd spent weeks imagining this moment, fantasizing about vindication, about watching Bethany face consequences, about public acknowledgement of everything she'd done. But sitting in that conference room, staring at two executives who were finally listening, I realized revenge wasn't what I wanted. I wanted fairness. I wanted the career I'd earned. I wanted distance from the person who'd spent years systematically undermining me. "I want the promotion I was qualified for 3 years ago," I said steadily. "I want to be evaluated based on my actual performance, not manufactured concerns. And I want to report to someone other than Bethany Cruz." Simone nodded. "We can arrange that. I also want the salary adjustment retroactive to when I should have been promoted originally," I added, surprised by my own boldness. Warren winced, but Simone smiled slightly. "We'll need to discuss that with legal, but given the circumstances, I think we can find an equitable resolution." She stood, extending her hand. "Welcome to the executive team, Director Hartley." Bethany disappeared from the office 3 days after I accepted the promotion. No dramatic firing, no public announcement. Just a quiet reassignment to a regional role in a different state with no direct reports and significantly reduced authority. The official explanation was organizational restructuring, but everyone who'd been paying attention knew exactly what had happened. Her carefully constructed facade had finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. I learned later from Warren that she'd been given a choice: accept the reassignment or face termination with cause. She took the reassignment. On her last day, she cleaned out her office after hours. I saw the empty shelves the next morning and felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a hollow kind of sadness. Not for her, but for all the wasted years, the unnecessary struggle, the talent she'd suppressed in others to protect her own position. How many other employees had she undermined? How many careers had she damaged before HR finally looked closely enough to see the pattern? My first team meeting as Director of Operations felt surreal. I sat at the head of the conference table, Bethany's old seat, and looked around at faces I'd worked alongside for years. Some looked genuinely happy for me. Others seemed uncertain about the sudden power shift. I didn't waste time with elaborate explanations or justifications. "I know the past few months have been confusing," I said simply. "All I can promise is that I'll be transparent, consistent, and fair. If you have concerns about my leadership, bring them to me directly. I won't always get it right, but I'll always listen." Marcus smiled. Keisha nodded approvingly. Even Trevor, who could have resented me for reclaiming the role he'd briefly held, looked relieved. After the meeting, people approached me differently. Not with the casual camaraderie of a peer, but with the respect due a leader. It felt strange and right at the same time. I didn't need to explain my history or defend my qualifications. The title did that for me now. My name was finally where it belonged. 3 months into my new role, I ran into Bethany at an industry conference. I saw her first, standing alone near the registration desk, looking diminished somehow in a way that had nothing to do with her physical presence. For a moment, I considered walking past without acknowledging her, pretending I didn't see her, taking the easy exit. But I didn't. I walked directly toward her, and when she saw me coming, something flickered across her face. Shame, maybe, or fear. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Nina," she said quietly. "Bethany," I replied evenly. An awkward silence stretched between us. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she'd been threatened by my competence? That she'd systematically sabotaged me because she couldn't stand the idea of someone she'd once mentored surpassing her? None of it would change what happened. "I hope the new role is going well," she finally managed. "It is," I said simply. Then I walked past her toward the conference hall, my new title on my badge, my head held high, leaving her standing alone in the lobby of a career she'd destroyed with her own hands. The settlement check arrived 4 months after my promotion. 18 months of back pay, adjusted to the director-level salary I should have been receiving. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial validation mattered. It was corporate's acknowledgement, in the clearest possible terms, that I'd been wronged. That years of my career had been stolen by someone who was supposed to mentor me, that the system had failed me until I forced it to look closely enough to see the truth. I deposited the check and used part of it to take my team out for dinner, a thank you for those who'd told the truth when HR asked questions, who'd refused to participate in Bethany's narrative, who'd seen my work clearly when it would have been easier to stay silent. To honesty, Marcus toasted, raising his glass. To finally being heard, Keisha added. We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Genuine professional satisfaction, untainted by the bitter aftertaste of being undervalued and overlooked. A year after everything changed, I got a LinkedIn message from a woman I didn't know. "My name is Stacy Monroe," it began. "I used to work at Midwest Distribution Systems under Bethany Cruz. I left 3 years ago after being repeatedly passed over for promotion despite excellent performance reviews. I recently heard what happened with your situation, and it explains so much about my own experience. Thank you for standing up. You probably helped more people than you realize." I stared at the message, feeling a chill run down my spine. How many others had there been? How many talented employees had Bethany quietly suppressed, undermined, and driven away before anyone noticed the pattern? I responded to Stacy, thanking her for reaching out, and we ended up having a long phone conversation about our experiences. Her story mirrored mine almost exactly: public praise, private criticism, vague concerns that were never substantiated, promises that evaporated when promotion time came. She'd eventually left the company, assuming the problem was her. Now she knew better. I'm sitting in my office now, the one with my name on the door, the one I earned through 9 years of excellent work that someone tried to erase with carefully planted doubts. On my desk is a framed copy of the organizational chart, the one where my name finally appears in the box it should have occupied years ago. I didn't frame it out of ego. I framed it as a reminder, not of what was done to me, but of what I survived and how I survived it. I didn't destroy Bethany Cruz. I didn't need to. I simply told the truth, documented everything, and refused to accept a narrative that didn't match reality. The system that failed me for years eventually worked, not because it was designed to protect people like me, but because I made it impossible to ignore the evidence. People sometimes ask if I got closure. I tell them yes, but not the dramatic kind. Closure wasn't watching Bethany lose her job or receiving a settlement check. Closure was the moment I stopped questioning my own competence, stopped internalizing her doubts, stopped believing that patience and loyalty would eventually be rewarded without documentation and advocacy. I survived her, and I built something better, not just for myself, but for everyone who comes after me. Because now I'm the one making promotion decisions, writing performance reviews, mentoring younger employees. And I remember exactly what it feels like to have your career held hostage by someone threatened by your potential. I'll never do that to anyone else. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not vindication, just making sure the cycle ends with me.